over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Plenty of things going on already. Daily NHL picks from Parker Michaels. Situational tips across 4 different sports betting markets from me. College football power ratings. NFL power ratings will be coming here tomorrow or tonight or tomorrow morning from Danny Borgs. UFC, NASCAR, soccer, golf, tennis, all that good stuff over at BangTheBook.com. Make sure you check it out. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio, presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB and the number 200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Couple guests on the program here today. We start with professional handicapper Bryan Leonard from WagerTalk.com. Bryan, how's it going today, man?
It's going very well, and I do apologize for missing last week, but hopefully we can bring some winners to the listeners today and make up for it.
Sure hope so, and I appreciate that you do this every week. It's very rare that we get any cancellations from our guests, and usually when we do, it's a very, very good reason for it. So, hey, just appreciate you coming on every week here and joining me, and we got a lot of things to talk about here for this week, and a market that we don't typically talk about here on the show, we will after college football and the NFL are done, is the NBA. And I know that's something that you do a lot here at this time of the year. So any, impressions here now that we're about a month into the season?
Yeah, a lot of impressions. I do something a little bit different. I started it this year is, people are always talking ATS records, win-losses, based on the final score of the game. But there's a lot of what I consider coin flip situations at the end of these NBA games. If you're an NBA bettor, you know as well as anybody else how it works out. You're covering the entire game, then all of a sudden the team hits a 3 at the buzzer, and it's the first time they've covered the entire game. And people go look back and they'll count that team as the ATS winner. And as the season goes on, you forget how that game played out. And you look and you'll say, hey, this team is very good on the road in this situation. And, they're 6-3 or whatever. Well, if you only count it based on the final score, that will be what you come up with. But I have charted this year the average lead in the game. For example, last night, let me check at my NBA schedule. Last night there were 2 games in which the team that won the game was behind most of the game. One of them was the Utah Jazz. They had that big fourth quarter run. They win 119-114. They did not cover the spread, but they did get the victory. But if you look at that game overall, the Brooklyn Nets led by 3.9 points on average in that entire game. So even though Utah got the victory, I make a note of that, and I feel that Brooklyn may have an edge in that regard. Same thing with Cleveland and Philadelphia. Philadelphia wins 98-97. But if you watch that game, Cleveland was the better team. Cleveland had a 1.9 average lead in that game all game long. And it's something I do for live betting also. Coming into the fourth quarter, Cleveland was with them the entire game. And Cleveland was getting +6 entering the fourth quarter in live betting. I bet Cleveland. They were up by 5 late in that game. Tristan Thompson had a brain fart for about 2 minutes and couldn't do anything right. In fact, he did everything wrong, which cost the Cavaliers the game. But he did play excellent up to that point. But, people are going to look at that and say, well, here's Cleveland again, another loss. They've got a bad record. But if you've watched the Cavaliers, especially after they played Boston. Now, when they played Boston, Boston has they probably got the best ball movement in the league now that Golden State is no longer Golden State. And you watch Boston, and they're not sticky anywhere, meaning that if some guy's got the ball, he either shoots it or he passes it. And after the game, the new Cleveland Cavalier coach came over from Michigan. He's brand new coach to the NBA. He said, that is the kind of ball we're going to play the rest of the season. He says, now that we have seen the way it works with Boston, you're going to see us playing it a little bit better. Now that the guys got it in their head and they've had to defend it. Well, if you followed the Cleveland Cavaliers since that time, Cleveland is playing a totally different type of basketball. It's all clicked in their heads because they were able to see it against them. They played the Knicks a couple nights ago. They were blowing out the Knicks at the half. Second half line comes out. It's got the Knicks favored by 6. And you just watched every play of that game, and the Cavaliers were defending the rim. They were excited about the game. This is a team that doesn't win very often, as we both know, coming from Cleveland. They were excited in that game, and so I bet Cleveland in the second half plus the 6. Cleveland actually outscores the Knicks in the second half. Being able to watch these games and being able to get the stats and see more than what the final score is a huge benefit in the NBA.
Now, obviously, there are a lot of good in-game situations, which is what you're talking about in terms of, some quarter betting, some live betting, some half betting. In terms of something like last night with a Brooklyn and Utah, I mean, do you look to play against Utah from a full game standpoint in the next game because it was a pretty misleading final? Maybe look to play on Brooklyn thinking that there's some extra value. Is that just a one-game thing, or is that kind of a longer-term look for you?
Well, in this case, it's a one-game thing. But when you chart every team in the league, you could see some generalizations. For one, the Denver Nuggets are probably the most overrated team in the NBA, if it's not the Philadelphia 76ers. Denver is a team who continues to be talked about, and the Lions consider them to be an elite team in the league. And maybe they will be. They have the talent to do that. But as we know, when you're playing in baseball, 162 games, NBA 82 games, it's a long season. You're going to have your ebbs and flows, and the Lions really are slow to react in that regard. So you saw Denver last night. They lose that game outright to Atlanta. Atlanta actually, their average lead in that game was 2 points, and then Atlanta wins that game 125-121. So if I'm checking the Denver Nuggets on the season, I'm looking at their record, and sure, they've only lost 3 games all season. But if you take a look at the average line in the game that a team had to lead, they should be 5-5. And when you take a look at that numbers after 10 games, they've only been ahead in those games on average by 0.15 points per game. So it's been basically a coin flip. And you take a look at the lines, the Denver Nuggets have been favored in every single game this season. It tells me the lines maker hasn't caught up with Denver, and Denver's a team I'm looking to play against. And if you look at their numbers, they've only covered 3 times all season. So that's something that's very important. And as opposed to maybe the Utah one-game situation, Denver's a team that I'm looking to fade as the season goes on until they do start playing up to their competition. And you have teams out there right now like Phoenix, Toronto, the Boston Celtics that are playing over their heads right now, and I'm taking advantage of it. And, Phoenix blew that game last night against the Lakers, but for the entire game, they were right there the entire game. And that game overall was so tight, there was nobody that had an advantage overall. It was basically 0-0 the entire game. It was such a tight game overall.
And it's funny too, because I sort of look at the NBA. I mean, I'm not a big basketball fan in general. I do like college more than the NBA, but I kind of dismiss the NBA as a sport that I feel, or as a league that I feel like is very difficult to bet on, because I feel like you've got a lot of questionable motivation night in and night out, a lot of scheduling spots. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. Obviously, you've got players that sit out, but it sounds like it's actually the opposite, where the NBA may be one of the best markets to bet.
It could be if you go beyond the traditional box scores. I'll be honest with you. My only NBA play yesterday was the Oklahoma City Thunder, and they got crushed by 26. So I'm not going to win them all. We're 11-7 on the season, off to a nice start. But that was a terrible pick. Oklahoma City just didn't show up. And Indiana's been a team playing a lot better ball as of late. But if you take a look at the Indiana schedule, Oklahoma City is probably the best team they played this year. They had a very easy schedule. That's something I'll be able to go against Indiana with in the future. And so even though I lost the game, it was nice I lost in blowout fashion, because now everybody thinks that Indiana is as good as what they were hyped coming into the season. They still don't have their best player back. So I think there'll be some value on betting against Indiana because of that. But yeah, it's different now than it's been in the past. And when I started close to 40 years ago, I started in the NBA, and that's how I made my living. And the NBA has been so tough the last few years. The reason being is you don't know who's going to play. And that's the thing. Like Philadelphia, I'm sure Embiid's not playing tonight. Third game is 4 nights, second of a back-to-back, which is why Orlando's taking a little bit of money on, so far this morning. But that's one of the reasons that the NBA is soured on a lot of people, including myself, is because you don't know who's going to play. But as long as you're on Twitter and you follow the beat writers, you're able to get a little bit of an advantage there. But, a lot of these guys, the guys backing them up, not an Embiid situation or an elite player situation, but a lot of these guys, the guys sitting at the bench to get a chance to play, they're an extremely good player. And for that one game, they could come out and play very well. So it's not an injury situation. It's a situation where they can come in and show what they've got for one game, and they do. And even with the injuries, we've known that for years. If a team has an injury player, they come up the first game and perform very well, and then after that, you fade them. But, the NBA's, anytime you're playing in a league where you've got, for example, Orlando's been off 2 days in a row. Philadelphia's playing the third game of 4 nights. Being able to keep track of things like that is definitely a help. And, I get the killersports.com NBA schedule book, and he goes through every single game. Ed Meyer goes through every single game, and he'll say who's coming up next, who they just played, what the scheduling situation is for both teams. And it definitely is something that you could track as the season goes on. And certain teams aren't very good in the second of back-to-back, or they may be resting a certain person in that situation. So it's a lot more to look at than just final scores and lines.
Well, and of course, too, I mean, the record that's posted over at wagertalk.com for you, only full game sides and totals, because you do a lot of in-game wagering, second half stuff, as we mentioned already. Right. That stuff, it's hard to track because not everybody has access to it or can get to it in time. Would you say that the NBA is the best sport to live bet, in your opinion?
I think it is because you get a lot more scoring with totals now basically today, everything's in the 200s and up to the 233.5. So you're getting a lot more scoring in this game. So you're going to have chances for teams to get on more runs. And if there's certain sites out there, and I'm not going to give away any trade secrets, but there's certain sites out there that will give you a breakdown of when these 5 players were on the court, how they did. So when you see a team that normally would break a certain player, like when LeBron came to Cleveland, was in Cleveland, he would break usually the last 2 minutes of the first quarter. So you go back and chart how Cleveland did with LeBron in the game and how they did without LeBron in the game. And you were able to take advantage of that knowing his break is coming up. And so you bet against Cleveland in that situation. And then when he comes back, then you could bet on Cleveland. So I don't know if that's all in the algorithm, but it's something that I use. And for live betting, it definitely helps. And like last night, if you take a look at the Knicks are by far, well, Golden State's really bad too, but the Knicks are by far the worst team in the NBA. And they got off to a nice start against Chicago. And Chicago is one of these teams, by my charting, that they're a lot better than what their record shows. And so the Knicks got off to like a 4-point lead very early in the game. The line on the game was 6.5, and I was able to lay 4.5 with the Bulls based on one little hot streak that the New York Knicks had. And, of course, the Bulls win that game by 20. And that's a one-game sample. Anything can happen. But that's the kind of advantages you can get by playing the NBA, getting 2 points better than what the line was only, maybe 4 minutes into the game.
Well, something for listeners to definitely keep an eye on here tonight with 7 games in the NBA. And we transition over to the college football side where we've got 2 games that, quite frankly, I don't really know if anybody wants to watch the MAC at this point in time. Last night, I had under 50, and I had under 50 early in the week on Eastern Michigan and Akron. And once I saw the closing line value I had, I knew it had no shot of coming through because that's just how it's been so far this year. 35-point second half in Akron, miserable conditions, no crowd whatsoever. That game goes over. Massive second half of Western Michigan and Ohio. That one went over the total as well. So for people that just jumped on the over for action, congratulations, you won both of those. But tonight, I mean, look, we've got two probably ugly games again. Bowling Green, Miami of Ohio. Miami of Ohio, a 17-point home favorite in this one over Bowling Green. And then Northern Illinois and Toledo. Shit, I'm old enough to remember when this was a massive action game, 2010, 2011. Now Toledo's a 2.5-point favorite, total 54. No idea what to do with either one of those teams. You got any interest tonight in either one of these games, Brian?
No, I don't. I did have Ohio last night. I took a +1. Line bounced up and down, changing favorites all day long. But I had Ohio lose that game in overtime. These two, I made Miami about 17 here. It's tough to lay 17 points when you don't score much. The total in this game is only 49. Bowling Green, they give up a lot of points, but they are able to score a little bit. Miami's just the opposite team. They don't give up many points, but they don't score many. So it's kind of funny. It's kind of like the Northwestern game this week where you lay at 41 points in a game when a team has a trouble scoring. And that is probably, to me, the most interesting game for the weekend. But, in these two games, I think the line is where it should be. My line is a little bit higher on Toledo, but Northern Illinois has played the tougher schedule. And I don't really want to lay points with Toledo. I don't trust them. So I'm going to be passing on both these games this evening.
Yeah, I won't have any interest. I mean, I got out in front of that total in the Akron game. That's the only reason I played it was because I knew it was going to go down. Weather forecast was terrible. Akron hadn't scored a touchdown in like 6 weeks or whatever it was. Of course, they get an 87-yard touchdown pass in that game because, God forbid that one stay under. But the one thing I will say about these games here tonight, you've got a Northern Illinois team that's sitting there at 3-6 right now. First-year head coach Thomas Hammock. They've got to run the table against Toledo, Eastern, and Western. Not going to be easy for them to get to bowl eligibility here. If they lose tonight, I worry about this team quite a bit the next 2 weeks because keep in mind, this is a team not that far removed from playing, a New Year's Six BCS type of appearance, a team that, is used to having high expectations that they are clearly not going to meet this season.
Yeah, that's true. And I believe Ralph Michaels has talked about that. And yeah, Northern Illinois is one of those constants in this conference where they're going to be one of the top 3 teams in this league. They're going to go bowling. They finished the season with Eastern Michigan and Western Michigan. It's also Northern's 4th road game in the last 5 weeks. And actually, when you look at their schedule, the previous 4 weeks before that, they were on the road for 3 of those 4 weeks. So they've had a brutal schedule when you take a look at it. And obviously, when you're in the MAC, you're not traveling very far. But they're one of the more outliers in the MAC when you take a look at it geographically. Most of the teams in Michigan and then in general Ohio area. So the travel has been a little bit tougher for them. But you're right. You get these teams that are normally playing for something at the end of the year, and they may not be playing for something this year. That's a concern as you go into the final weeks of the season. And Toledo's going to go bowling again. Toledo's got a decent record, but they're not the team that they have been in the past. And you take a look, even in wins lately, they beat Penn State by 2 last week. They beat Eastern Michigan by 3 the week before. Western, they win by 7. BYU by 7. They're winning a lot of these coin flip games, but they're not a good football team this year. And normally Toledo at home, they're a team that you're looking to back, but I can't trust them.
Yeah, here in 5 MAC games this season, Toledo outscored by 39 points, which is not something at all that we've seen from Toledo here of late. By the way, Northern Illinois, this is their 7th road game of the season out of 10 games. So that just speaks to the schedule that you talked about. Maybe something that we should have paid attention to from a season win total standpoint. Won't be long until those are posted again. Schedule analysis, very important. And if you've got that imbalanced home and road, split of games, something you definitely want to keep a close eye on here for next season in the win total market. We'll go off script real quickly here just because I just want to get your thoughts on this line move for Thursday night between Buffalo and Kent State, up from 4.5 to as high as 6.5 now with Buffalo laying a road price. Is that a line move that you agree with?
Let me take a look here and see what I have it. 311, 312. I have Buffalo as probably a 3-point favorite here. And as you mentioned, it's gone from 3.5 up to 6. A lot of love for Buffalo here, but my number's not showing it. I went through it, and basically Buffalo's played a much tougher schedule than Kent State. We're to the point of the season now where we can break teams down by their schedule, and just because your power rating has a certain number, you have to definitely go back and see who they've played. And the schedule strength for Buffalo, I think people have realized that it's much stronger than Kent State, and I think that's why it's going up, but it's not enough to make me get involved in this contest.
I think it's one of those things, too, where, you get these MAC games on weeknights, and people are dying to play them. They're dying for a team to actually trust in this conference. And the only team you can trust is Akron in terms of going against them because they've been so bad against the spread this year. I think that's part of the sentiment here for Buffalo, too, is that, as you mentioned, they played a pretty good schedule. They were leading Penn State at halftime. They played very well in some of their other games. I think people are just dying for something to trust in this conference, and maybe Buffalo right now is that team.
There's so many times when when a Buffalo or Kent State play, the vast majority of people have not seen a Buffalo or Kent State game all season long. We are getting into the point of the season now where the MAC is playing on these weekdays games. It's not the first week, it'll be the second or third week. And if a team comes out and plays very well in one game, where that money's coming the second game, because a lot of your guys that are normally playing your televised games, they don't know anything about these teams, but they saw, hey, last week this team looked really good and this other team looked really bad, and now they're playing each other. Where that line's going to go. The public's going to come in on that. But you just saw 1/10 of their season or whatever. One game out of 10 games that they have played, 9-10 games. So you really don't have the whole picture unless you follow these teams. And it's just like you said, there's people out there that want the action. And to be honest with you, I would rather, and I've passed on a lot of these midweek games with the MAC this year. I just haven't seen the value, and I'd rather play college basketball or the NBA, where a lot of people don't know as much about it at this point. I mean, I've gotten arguments with people when at this point of the season, they would rather watch a college football game or an NFL game over a college basketball game or an NBA game. And I said, well, you've already seen these teams play 9 times already. They only have 3 games left in the season. There's only limited time for you to take advantage of that going through the rest of the year, as opposed to maybe the NBA, when they play 10 games, and you still have 70 more games to take a look at. Same with college. These guys only play 2 or 3 games. They got another 40 games or whatever, 35 games to play the rest of the year. And you could definitely learn something from that. So, even though everybody loves to bet football, and I don't blame them. I mean, football is America's sport. The lines are tighter at this time of year. And my plays have been, the last 3 weeks I've had one NFL play each of the last 3 weeks. The lines are just so much tighter that I'm just looking to make profit for my clients, regardless of what sport it's in. And you're going to make it more money in the first month of any sport, I think, than you're going to make anywhere else, because you've got the same advantage the lines maker has. And they don't know anything about it. You don't know anything about it. You put in the work, and especially in college basketball, there's so many teams out there. If you follow one team and one conference, you should have a huge head up over everybody else early on in the season.
All right, so we go to Saturday here, and we'll pay homage and give a little bit of a hat tip to our mutual friend, Wes Reynolds. I know you were chatting with him last night. We'll get him back on the show again next Wednesday, but I just wanted to make sure we got Kyle Hunter, a segment with Kyle Hunter on the show here this week. So wanted to get that here on today's program. We'll get Wes back on the show next week. But in honor of him, let's talk about his Indiana Hoosiers here. Game 325, 326 on Saturday. I think this game is really interesting. Penn State, maybe a little bit of a bubble burst angle for them. They lose their undefeated season at Minnesota last week, yet they're laying 14.5 here this week to Indiana, a Hoosiers team in the top 25 in college football for the first time in 25 years.
Yeah, a lot of people will be looking to play against either one of these teams. Indiana, as you said, finally getting some recognition Penn State with possible bubble burst, but I don't know if Penn State entered this season thinking they were going to play for anything more than a chance to get in a good bowl game. Ohio State's been better than anybody thought they were going to be coming into the season, although the talent has always been there. But, you take a look at the strength of schedule. Penn State's 23rd, Indiana's 96. So there's a huge strength of schedule edge for Penn State here. You take a look at the game scores so far. I'm looking at Indiana's number against Penn State's number, and Penn State's probably maybe about 10 points better on a neutral. And you're catching them at home here, and give them 3.5, so it's 13.5 right there. And we're talking about the line being 14.5. So when you add in the strength of schedule for Penn State against Indiana, my numbers say Penn State's the side. We're looking at 14.5 here. I'd love to see a 14 again, an open 14 to play Penn State. Probably still play Penn State because a lot of people will take a look at that and see that, maybe they did have that bubble burst, but I don't believe it. I would look to fade Indiana. Ralph Michaels has been following this all year. When a team makes the top 25, they've just been a fade the following week. I think that's what we're going to see out of Indiana here. The strength of schedule is huge, and you usually don't see that, a 32 and a 96 in the same conference this far into the season. Indiana's taken advantage of weak opponents, but to give them credit, in the past, a lot of times they've just come up short against weak opponents, and they've had many weeks that they've basically underperformed. This year, Indiana's done what they've had to do against these weak opponents. They played good ball. They're deserving of being a top 25-30 team. But I think there's some value here on Penn State. I'm looking to play Penn State here. It's a slightly better number.
Well, and of course, too, you factor in Penn State plays Ohio State next week. Now, they're going to be, I think I have Penn State a 20-point dog in that game, 19 or 20-point dog on the road in Columbus. So people are going to play up this look-ahead factor. They're going to play up this sandwich spot factor where maybe people get too cute with this handicap. Maybe Penn State is just far and away the better team, and we'll see how this one plays out. But I think it's one of the most interesting handicaps of the Week 12 college football slate. We'll spend a couple minutes real quickly here on the NFL. We ran a little bit longer than I thought on the NBA, but that's not a problem because, as you said, more opportunities in the NBA. We don't talk about it as much here on the show, but I wanted to pick your brain about a couple of NFL games here. And in fact, I'm going to go off script again just because we're both Cleveland guys. So I want to get your take on Thursday Night Football here. Game 309, 310, Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Browns, 2.5-point favorite. A lot of extra juice out there on the 2.5s for this short week. I know you've been following the Browns. I know you've been paying attention. Obviously, by proxy, we wind up following the Steelers too. What do you think about this one here on Thursday night?
Well, from a handicapping standpoint, I tend to lean with Cleveland anything less than 3, based on the talent of the teams and the situation here with Cleveland playing at home. But knowing the history of these two teams and knowing I'm not a big believer in the Pittsburgh Steelers coaching staff. I think they win based on their players, not on the coaching staff. I'm not a fan of the coaching staff at all. But the Cleveland coaching staff continues to find ways to screw this team up. And you have two teams, just from a blind standpoint, Pittsburgh this year has a winning record now. They have lost their Hall of Fame quarterback early in the season, but they find ways to win. Cleveland Browns, the more talented team by far in this game, I believe, continue to find ways to lose. And if it wasn't for that last drive, they lose last week again to Buffalo in a game where I happen to like Buffalo, but most people I talked to were all over Cleveland. It's a game that if it comes down to the fourth quarter, I'm looking to bet live on Pittsburgh because I know that the team as a whole knows how to win. I don't think Cleveland knows how to win. I don't want to lay points with Cleveland, although I think at this point, as long as it's less than 3, I lean that way. But we'll see how this goes in live betting, and I'll be looking to take a chance on Pittsburgh when it gets down to the fourth quarter in a tight game.
We talked about Buffalo and Miami on Tuesday's show with Brian Blessing. I want to talk about Arizona and San Francisco with you here. Game 467, 468. These two games are very interesting to me because you're starting to get into that second division matchup. So you've got an adjusted line from the first game. For example, Buffalo in the first game against Miami, a 17-point home favorite. Now this week, a 6-point road favorite against a Miami team that's been playing much better here of late. Arizona and San Francisco is interesting because a few weeks ago on Halloween night, San Francisco was a 10-point road favorite traveling on a short week to take on Arizona. This week, they're an 11.5-point home favorite against the Cardinals. So we've obviously seen some adjustments with these two teams over the last couple of weeks here. San Francisco, potential bubble burst game for them, losing last week to Seattle. What do you think about this one here in the NFC West, Brian?
Yeah, you talked about the Buffalo, Miami, and I could definitely see that as Miami's playing a lot better ball than they did earlier in the season, and Buffalo is probably not as good as what their record showed. So that one made a lot of sense. This one, I'm not sure it does. It opened 13.5 is what I have. Bet down to 11.5 cheap numbers, which means it's going to 11. San Francisco, obviously, a little bit shorter time frame here, but just because a lot of people saw that game on national TV and they didn't look as good in that game, they were right there in that game. That game could have gone either way. The overtime obviously is something you want to take a look at here, and shorter game or shorter week with an overtime, I could definitely see that. But what has Arizona done to make you want to change your mind against Arizona? I doubt it gets down to 10. If it's 10, it's a buy for me on San Francisco. It may be a buy at 11. That's the side I'm looking at right now. But I haven't had too many plays in the NFL. Like I said, lines have been really tight to me. So I don't know if I'll get there, but it seems to me the value here is on San Francisco.
You've got a fourth road game in 5 weeks scenario here for Arizona, coming back off the Tampa Bay game. Yeah, they've covered 5 of their last 6, but Cincinnati, who's a dumpster fire, Atlanta, same thing up until last week when they beat New Orleans. The Giants are a mess. The only non-cover in there is Arizona getting blown out by New Orleans, which isn't really surprising. They cover that game against San Francisco on the short week. San Francisco off the Carolina blowout loss. Then cover last week against Tampa Bay, which Tampa Bay is not good enough to put margin on anybody because Jameis Winston can't stop turning the football over. So this may be a case of some recency bias here, where San Francisco's lost 3 of their last 4 against the spread. Arizona's won 5 of their last 6. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it in the context of the contests, but I agree with you. I think San Francisco is probably the way to look here, especially if this line does keep coming down.
If I'm correct, and I don't remember, but didn't San Francisco have a sizable lead in that game, and it was sort of like the backdoor type of cover?
Let me check. I think that does make sense. So it sounds like that's pretty familiar to me.
So that's one of those. It's similar to what I talked about in the NBA, where you take a look at the entire game and how the game was played out. So just because a team got the cover at the end of the game does not mean that was the team that deserved the cover after the game was played. So, San Francisco or nothing for me. Hopefully, this line will continue to go down.
Yeah, you look at that game. San Francisco was up 21-7 at half. They were up 28-14. Arizona covered on an 88-yard touchdown pass to Andy Isabella. It was a 35-second drive, and then San Francisco salted the game away with their last possession. So, yeah, you could make a case that San Francisco probably should have covered the 10 in that game, winning by 11 because Arizona got the 2-point conversion. So, yeah, again, a little bit of recency bias creeping into this one. I guess we'll see how this one plays out, also how the line movement sets up for the rest of the week. Professional handicapper Bryan Leonard from wagertalk.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
Wednesday is video day, and we're going in today, and we brought in one of our NBA experts, another quality NBA handicapper from out of town that's going to come in and do some videos. So we're pretty excited about that. And, you talked about the one of the other games that we talked about, the sandwich situation. And, Marco D'Angelo has his sandwich game of the week on there, and he's done very well in that. But I'm sure that may be one of the plays he uses for the sandwich game of the week. But, yeah, a lot of good information on there. We've got, obviously we own the Gold Sheet now, so Bruce Marshall is in there each and every week. And then Bruce is just he's worked for the Gold Sheet forever, and the guy's got a memory that just amazes me. And he's got great information, great stories, and I really enjoy listening to him talk, and gives us good information. So we got a lot of quality guys on there, and half of the guys are on your show. I mean, Rob Michaels is on the show here too. So a lot of good quality information, all videos, and of course a couple of beautiful girls in Minty Betts and Kelly in Vegas. So it's nice for the eye candy, and they're just as beautiful in person and as they are in videos. And you know that as well, because you did come in and do videos with us once, and we're looking forward to getting you back.
Yeah, looking forward to that here sometime in the spring once I finish up my season win total betting guide for Major League Baseball. And who knows, maybe it'll coincide with the Indians being out there for some spring training action against the A's. But Bryan Leonard, professional handicapper, wagertalk.com, at @BLeonardSports on Twitter. Appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds great. Everybody have a good day, and let's get some winners.